This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum, Chapter 20, The Home of the Ocean Monarch. Trot sobbed quietly with her head on Cap'n Bill's shoulder. She had been a brave little girl during the trying times they had experienced, and never once had she given way to tears, however desperate their fate had seemed to be. But now that the one enemy in all the sea to be dreaded was utterly destroyed, and all dangers were past, the reaction was so great that she could not help having just one good cry, as she naively expressed it. Cap'n Bill was a big sailor man, hardened by age and many adventures, but even he felt a lump in his throat that he could not swallow, try as hard as he might. Cap'n Bill was glad. He was mostly glad on Trot's account, for he loved his sweet childish companion very dearly and did not want any harm to befall her. They were now in the wide open sea, with liberty to go wherever they wished, and if Cap'n Bill could have had his say, he would have gone straight home and carried Trot to her mother. But the mermaids must be considered. Aquareine and Clia had been true and faithful friends to their earth guests while dangers were threatening, and it would not be very gracious to leave them at once. Moreover, King Anko was now with them, his big head keeping pace with the mermaids as they swam, and this mighty preserver had a distinct claim upon both Trot and Cap'n Bill. The sailor felt that it would not be polite to ask to go home so soon. "If you people had come to visit me, as I invited you to do," said the Sea Serpent, "all this bother and trouble would have been saved. I had my palace all put in order to receive the earth dwellers, and sat in my den waiting patiently to receive you, yet you never came at all." "That reminds me," said Trot, drying her eyes. "You never told us about that third pain you once had." "Finally," continued Anko, "I sent to inquire as to what had become of you, and Merla said you had been gone from the palace a long time, and she was getting anxious about you. Then I made inquiries. Everyone in the sea loves to serve me, except those sea devils and their cousins, the octopi, and it wasn't long before I heard you had been captured by Zog." "Was the third pain as bad as the other two?" asked Trot. "Naturally, this news disturbed me and made me unhappy," said Anko, "for I well knew, my Aquareine, that the magician's evil powers were greater than your own fairy accomplishments. But I had never been able to find Zog's enchanted castle, and so I was at a loss to know how to save you from your dreadful fate. After I had wasted a good deal of time thinking it over, I decided that if the sea devils were slaves of Zog, the prince of the sea devils must know where the enchanted castle was located. I knew this prince and where to find him, for he always lay on a hollow rock on the bottom of the sea and never moved from that position. His people brought food to him and took his commands. So I had no trouble in finding this evil prince, and I went to him and asked the way to Zog's castle. Of course he would not tell me. He was even cross and disrespectful, just as I had expected him to be. So I allowed myself to become angry and killed him, thinking he was much better dead than alive. But after the sea devil was destroyed, what was my surprise to find that all these years he had been lying over a round hole in the rock and covering it with his scarlet body. A light shone through this hole, so I thrust my head in and found a great domed cave underneath, with a splendid silver castle built at the bottom. You, my friends, were at that moment swimming toward me as fast as you could come, and the monster Zog, my enemy for centuries past, was close behind you. Well, the rest of the story you know. I would be angry with all of you for so carelessly getting captured, had the incident not led to the destruction of the one evil genius in all my ocean. I shall rest easier and be much happier now that Zog is dead. He has defied me for hundreds of years." "But about that third pain," said Trot. "If you don't tell us now, I'm afraid that I'll forget to ask you." "If you should happen to forget, just remind me of it," said Anko, "and I'll be sure to tell you." While Trot was thinking this over, the swimmers drew near to a great circular palace made all of solid alabaster, polished as smooth as ivory. Its roof was a vast dome, for domes seemed to be fashionable in the ocean houses. There were no doors or windows, but instead of these, several round holes appeared in different parts of the dome, some being high up and some low down, and some in between. Out of one of these holes, which it just fitted, stretched the long brown body of the sea serpent. Trot, being astonished at this sight, asked, "Didn't you take all of it when you went to the cavern, Anko?" "Nearly all, my dear," was the reply, accompanied by a cheerful smile, for Anko was proud of his great length. "But not quite all. Some of me remained, as usual, to keep house while my head was away. But I've been coiling up ever since we started back, and you will soon be able to see every inch of me all together." Even as he spoke, his head slid into the round hole, and at a signal from Aquareine, they all paused outside and waited. Presently there came to them four beautiful winged fishes with faces like doll babies. Their long hair and eyelashes were of a purple color, and their cheeks had rosy spots that looked as if they had been painted upon them. "His Majesty bids you welcome," said one of the doll fishes in a sweet voice. "Be kind enough to enter the royal palace, and our ocean monarch will graciously receive you." "Seems to me," said Trot to the queen, "these things are putting on airs. Perhaps they don't know we're friends of Anko." "The king insists on certain formalities when anyone visits him," was Aquarine's reply. "It is right that his dignity should be maintained." They followed their winged conductors to one of the upper openings, and as they entered it, Aquareine said in a clear voice, "May the glory and power of the Ocean King continue forever." Then she touched the palm of her hand to her forehead in token of allegiance, and Clia did the same, so Cap'n Bill and Trot followed suit. The brief ceremony being ended, the child looked curiously around to see what the palace of the mighty Anko was like. An extensive hall lined with alabaster was before them. In the floor were 5 of the round holes. Upon the walls were engraved many interesting scenes of ocean life, all chiseled very artistically by the tusks of walruses, who, Trot was afterward informed, are greatly skilled in such work. A few handsome rugs of woven sea grasses were spread upon the floor, but otherwise the vast hall was bare of furniture. The doll-faced fishes escorted them to an upper room where a table was set, and here the travelers were invited to refresh themselves. As all four were exceedingly hungry, they welcomed the repast, which was served by an army of lobsters in royal purple aprons and caps. The meal being finished, they again descended to the hall, which seemed to occupy all the middle of the building. And now their conductors said, "His Majesty is ready to receive you in his den." They swam downward through one of the round holes in the floor and found themselves in a brilliantly lighted chamber, which appeared bigger than all the rest of the palace put together. In the center was the quaint head of King Anko, and around it was spread a great coverlet of purple and gold woven together. This concealed all of his body and stretched from wall to wall of the circular room. "Welcome, friends," said Anko pleasantly. "How do you like my home?" "It's very grand," replied Trot. "Just the place for a sea serpent, seems to me," said Cap'n Bill. "I'm glad you admire it," said the king. "Perhaps I ought to tell you that from this day you four belong to me." "How's that?" asked the girl, surprised. "It is a law of the ocean," declared Anko, "that whoever saves any living creature from violent death owns that creature forever afterward, while life lasts. You will realize how just this law is when you remember that had I not saved you from Zog, you would now be dead. The law was suggested by Captain Kidglove when he once visited me." "Do you mean Captain Kidd?" asked Trot. "Because if you do—" "Give him his full name," said Anko. "Captain Kidglove was—" "There's no glove to it," protested Trot. "I ought to know, 'cause I've read about him." "Didn't it say anything about a glove?" asked Anko. "Nothing at all. It just called him Cap'n Kidd," replied Trot. "She's right, ol' man," added Cap'n Bill. "Books," said the sea serpent, "are good enough as far as they go, but it seems to me your earth books don't go far enough. Cap'n Kidglove was a gentleman pirate, a kid glove pirate. To leave off the glove and call him just kid is very disrespectful." "Oh, you told me to remind you of that third pain," said the little girl. "Which proves my friendship for you," returned the sea serpent, blinking his blue eyes thoughtfully. "No one likes to be reminded of a pain, and that third pain was What was it?" asked Trot. "It was just a stomach ache," replied the king with a sigh. "What made it?" she inquired. "Just my carelessness," said Anko. "I'd been away to foreign parts, seeing how the Earth people were getting along. I found the Germans dancing the German, and the Dutch making Dutch cheese, and the Belgians combing their Belgian hairs, and the Turks eating turkey, and the Sardinians sardonically pickling sardines. Then I called on the Prince of Wales and—" "You mean the Prince of Wales," corrected Trot. "I mean what I say, my dear. I saw the battlefield where the Bull Run, but the Americans didn't. And when I got to France, I paid a Napoleon to see Napoleon with his bones apart. He was—" "Of course you mean," Trot was beginning, but the king would not give her a chance to correct him this time. "He was very hungry for Hungary," he continued, "and was rushin' so fast toward the poles that I thought he'd discover them. So as I was not accorded a royal welcome, I took French leave and came home again." "But the pain?" "On the way home," continued Anko calmly, "I was a little absent-minded and ate an anchor. There was a long chain attached to it, and as I continued to swallow the anchor, I continued to eat the chain. I never realized what I had done until I found a ship at the other end of the chain. Then I bit it off." "The ship?" asked Trot. "No, the chain. I didn't care for the ship, as I saw it contained some skippers. On the way home, the chain and anchor began to lie heavily in my stomach. I didn't seem to digest them properly, and by the time I got to my palace, where you will notice there is no throne, I was thrown into throes of severe pain. So I at once sent for Dr. Shark." "Are all your doctors sharks?" asked the child. "Yes. Aren't your doctors sharks?" he replied. "Not all of them," said Trot. "That is true," remarked Cap'n Bill. "But when you talk of lawyers—" "I'm not talking of lawyers," said Anko reprovingly. "I'm talking about my pain. I don't imagine anyone could suffer more than I did with that stomach ache." "Did you suffer long?" inquired Trot. "Why, about 7,482 feet and— I mean a long time." "It seemed like a long time," answered the king. "Dr. Shark said I ought to put a mustard poultice on my stomach. So I uncoiled myself and summoned my servants, and they began putting on the mustard plaster. It had to be bound all around me so it wouldn't slip off, and I began to look like an express package. In about 4 weeks, fully one half of the pain had been covered by the mustard poultice, which got so hot that it hurt me worse than the stomach ache did." "I know," said Trot. "I had one once." "One what?" asked Anko. "A mustard plaster. They smart pretty bad, but I guess they're a good thing." "I got myself unwrapped as soon as I could," continued the king, "and then I hunted for the doctor, who hid himself until my anger had subsided. He has never sent in a bill, so I think he must be terribly ashamed of himself." "You're lucky, sir, to have escaped so easy," said Cap'n Bill. "But you seem pretty well now." "Yes, I'm more careful of what I eat," replied the sea serpent. "But I was saying when Trot interrupted me that you all belong to me because I have saved your lives. By the law of the ocean, you must obey me in everything." The sailor scowled a little at hearing this, but Trot laughed and said, "The law of the ocean isn't our law, 'cause we live on land." "Just now you are living in the ocean," declared Anko, "and as long as you live here, you must obey my commands." "What are your commands?" inquired the child. "Ah, that's the point I was coming to," returned the king with his comical smile. "The ocean is a beautiful place, and we who belong here love it dearly. In many ways, it's a nicer place for a home than the earth, for we have no sunstrokes, mosquitoes, earthquakes, or candy shops to bother us. But I am convinced that the ocean is no proper dwelling place for earth people, and I believe the mermaids did an unwise thing when they invited you to visit them." "I don't," protested the girl. "We've had a fine time, haven't we, Cap'n Bill?" "Well, it's been different from what I expected," admitted the sailor. "Our only thought was to give the earth people pleasure, your Majesty," pleaded Aquareine. I know, my dear queen, and it was very good of you," replied Anko. "But still, it was an unwise act, for earth people are as constantly in danger under water as we would be upon the land. So, having won the right to command you all, I order you to take little Mayre and Cap'n Bill straight home and there restore them to their natural forms. It's a dreadful condition, I know, and they must each have two stumbling legs instead of a strong, beautiful fish tail. But it is the fate of earth dwellers, and they cannot escape it." "In my case, your majesty, make it one leg," suggested Cap'n Bill. "Ah, yes, I remember. One leg and a wooden stick to keep it company. I issue this order, my friends, not because I am not fond of your society, but to keep you from getting into more trouble in a country where all is strange and unnatural to you. Am I right, or do you think I am wrong?" "You're quite correct, sir," said Cap'n Bill, nodding his head in approval. "Well, I'm ready to go home," said Trot. "But in spite of Zog, I've enjoyed my visit, and I shall always love the mermaids for being so good to me." That speech pleased Aquareine and Clia, who smiled upon the child and kissed her affectionately. "We shall escort you home at once," announced the queen. "But before you go," said King Anko, "I will give you a rare treat. It is one you will remember as long as you live. You shall see every inch of the mightiest sea serpent in the world all at one time." As he spoke, the purple and gold cloth was lifted by unseen hands and disappeared from view. And now Cap'n Bill and Trot looked down upon thousands and thousands of coils of the sea serpent's body, which filled all of the space at the bottom of the immense circular room. It reminded them of a great coil of garden hose, only it was so much bigger around and very much longer. Except for the astonishing size of the Ocean King, the sight was not an especially interesting one. But they told old Anko that they were very pleased to see him, because it was evident he was very proud of his figure. Then the cloth descended again and covered all but the head, after which they bade the king goodbye and thanked him for all his kindness to them. "I used to think sea serpents were horrid creatures," said Trot, "but now I know they are good and big," added Cap'n Bill, realizing his little friend could not find another word that was complimentary. End of chapter 20. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 21, King Joe. As they swam out of Anko's palace and the doll-faced fishes left them, Aquareine asked, "Would you rather go back to our mermaid home for a time and rest yourselves, or would you prefer to start for Giant's Cave at once?" "I guess we'd better go back home," decided Trot. "To our own home, I mean. We've been away quite a while, and King Anko seemed to think it was best." "Very well," replied the queen. "Let us turn in this direction, then." "You can say goodbye to Merla for us," continued Trot. "She was very nice to us, and specially to Cap'n Bill." "So she was, mate," agreed the sailor. "And a prettier lady I never knew, even if she is a mermaid. Beggin' your pardon, ma'am." "Are we going anywhere near Zog's castle?" asked the girl. "Our way leads directly past the opening in the dome," said Aquareine. "Then let's stop and see what Sacco and the others are doing," suggested Trot. "They can't be slaves any longer, you know, 'cause they haven't any master. I wonder if they're any happier than they were before." "They seemed to be pretty happy as it was," remarked Cap'n Bill. "It will do no harm to pay them a brief visit," said Princess Clia. "All danger disappeared from the cavern with the destruction of Zog." "I really ought to say goodbye to Brother Joe," observed the sailor man. "I won't see him again, you know, and I don't want to seem unbrotherly." "Very well," said the queen. "We will re-enter the cavern, for I too am anxious to know what will be the fate of the poor slaves of the magician." When they came to the hole in the top of the dome, they dropped through it and swam leisurely down toward the castle. The water was clear and undisturbed, and the silver castle looked very quiet and peaceful under the radiant light that still filled the cavern. They met no one at all, and passing around to the front of the building, they reached the broad entrance and passed into the golden hall. Here a strange scene met their eyes. All the slaves of Zog, hundreds in number, were assembled in the room, while standing before the throne formerly occupied by the wicked magician was the boy Sako, who was just beginning to make a speech to his fellow slaves. "At one time or another," he said, "all of us were born upon the earth and lived in the thin air, but now we are all living as the fishes live, and our home is in the water of the ocean. One by one we have come to this place, having been saved from drowning by Zog the magician, and by him given power to exist in comfort underwater. The powerful master who made us his slaves has now passed away forever, but we continue to live and are unable to return to our native land, where we would quickly perish. There is no one but us to inherit Zog's possessions, and so it will be best for us to remain in this fine castle and occupy ourselves as we have done before in providing for the comforts of the community. Only in labor is happiness to be found, and we may as well labor for ourselves as for others. But we must have a king, not an evil, cruel master like Zog, but one who will maintain order and issue laws for the benefit of all. We will govern ourselves most happily by having a ruler or head selected from among ourselves by popular vote. Therefore, I ask you to decide who shall be our king, for only one who is accepted by all can sit in Zog's throne." The slaves applauded this speech, but they seemed puzzled to make the choice of a ruler. Finally, the chief cook came forward and said, "We all have our duties to perform, and so cannot spend the time to be king. But you, Sako, who were Zog's own attendant, have now no duties at all. So it will be best for you to rule us. What say you, comrades? Shall we make Sako king?" "Yes, yes!" they all cried. "But I do not wish to be king," replied Sako. "A king is a useless sort of person who merely issues orders for others to carry out. I want to be busy and useful. Whoever is king will need a good attendant, as well as an officer who will see that his commands are obeyed. I am used to such duties, having served Zog in this same way." "Who then has the time to rule over us?" asked Agagru the goldsmith. "It seems to me that Cap'n Joe is the proper person for king," replied Sako. "His former duty was to sew buttons on Zog's garments, so now he is out of a job and has plenty of time to be king, for he can sew on his own buttons. What do you say, Cap'n Joe?" "Oh, I don't mind," agreed Cap'n Joe. "That is, if you all want me to rule you." "We do!" shouted the slaves, glad to find someone willing to take the job. "But I'll want a few pointers," continued Cap'n Bill's brother. "I ain't used to this sort of work, you know, and if I ain't properly posted, I'm liable to make mistakes." "Sako will tell you," said Tom Atto encouragingly. "And now I must go back to the kitchen and look after my dumplings, or you people won't have any dinner today." "Very well," announced Sako. "I hereby proclaim Cap'n Joe elected king of the castle, which is the enchanted castle no longer. You may all return to your work." The slaves went away well contented, and the boy and Cap'n Joe now came forward to greet their visitors. "We are on our way home," explained Cap'n Bill, "and we don't expect to travel this way again. But it pleases me to know, Joe, that you're the king of such a fine castle, and I'll rest easier now that you're well provided for." "Oh, I'm all right, Bill," returned Cap'n Joe. "It's an easy life here and a peaceful one. I wish you was as well fixed." "If ever you need friends, Sako, or any assistance or counsel, come to me," said the Mermaid Queen to the boy. "Thank you, madam," he replied. "Now that Zog has gone, I am sure we shall be very safe and contented. But I shall not forget to come to you if we need you. We are not going to waste any time in anger or revenge or evil deeds, so I believe we shall prosper from now on." "I'm sure you will," declared Trot. They now decided that they must continue their journey, and as neither Sako nor King Joe could ascend to the top of the dome without swimming in the human way, which was slow and tedious work for them, the goodbyes were said at the castle entrance, and the four visitors started on their return. Trot took one last view of the beautiful silver castle from the hole high up in the dome, which was now open and unguarded, and the next moment she was in the broad ocean again, swimming toward home beside her mermaid friends. End of chapter 21. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 22. Trot Lives to Tell the Tale. Aquareine was thoughtful for a time. Then she drew from her finger a ring, a plain gold band set with a pearl of great value, and gave it to the little girl. "If at any period of your life the mermaids can be of service to you, my dear," she said, "you have but to come to the edge of the ocean and call Aquareine. If you are wearing this ring at the time, I shall instantly hear you and come to your assistance." "Thank you," cried the child, slipping the ring over her own chubby finger, which it fitted perfectly. "I shall never forget that I have good and loyal friends in the ocean, you may be sure." Away and away they swam, swiftly and in a straight line, keeping in the middle water where they were not liable to meet many sea people. They passed a few schools of fishes, where the teachers were explaining to the young ones how to swim properly and to conduct themselves in a dignified manner, but Trot did not care to stop and watch the exercises. Although the queen had lost her fairy wand in Zog's dome chamber, she had still enough magic power to carry them all across the ocean in wonderfully quick time, and before Trot and Cap'n Bill were aware of the distance they had come, the mermaids paused while Princess Clia said, "Now we must go a little deeper, for here is the giant's cave, and the entrance to it is near the bottom of the sea." "What, already?" cried the girl joyfully. And then through the darker water they swam, passing through the rocky entrance, and began to ascend slowly into the azure blue water of the cave. "You've been awfully good to us, and I don't know just how to thank you," said Trot earnestly. "We have enjoyed your visit to us," said beautiful Queen Aquareine, smiling upon her little friend, "and you may easily repay any pleasure we have given you by speaking well of the mermaids when you hear ignorant earth people condemning us." "I'll do that, of course!" exclaimed the child. "How about changing us back to our regular shapes?" inquired Cap'n Bill anxiously. "That will be very easy," replied Princess Clia with her merry laugh. "See, here we are at the surface of the water." They pushed their heads above the blue water and looked around the cave. It was silent and deserted. Floating gently near the spot where they had left it was their own little boat. Cap'n Bill swam to it, took hold of the side, and then turned an inquiring face toward the mermaids. "Climb in," said the queen. So he pulled himself up and awkwardly tumbled forward into the boat. As he did so, he heard his wooden leg clatter against the seat and turned around to look at it wonderingly. "It's me, all right," he muttered. "One meat and one hickory one. That's the same as belongs to me." "Will you lift Mayre aboard?" asked Princess Clia. The old sailor aroused himself, and as Trot lifted up her arms, he seized them and drew her safely into the boat. She was dressed just as usual, and her chubby legs wore shoes and stockings. Strangely enough, neither of them were at all wet or even damp in any part of their clothing. "I wonder where our legs have been while we've been gone," mused Cap'n Bill, gazing at his little friend in great delight. "And I wonder what's become of our pretty pink and green scaled tails," returned the girl, laughing with glee, for it seemed good to be herself again. Queen Aquareine and Princess Clia were a little way off, lying with their pretty faces just out of the water, while their hair floated in soft clouds around them. "Goodbye, friends," they called. "Goodbye," shouted both Trot and Cap'n Bill, and the little girl blew 2 kisses from her fingers towards the mermaids. Then the faces disappeared, leaving little ripples on the surface of the water. Cap'n Bill picked up the oars and slowly headed the boat toward the mouth of the cave. "I wonder, Trot, if your ma has missed us," he remarked uneasily. "Of course not," replied the girl. "She's been sound asleep, you know." As the boat crept out into the bright sunlight, they were both silent, but each sighed with pleasure at beholding their own everyday world again. Finally Trot said softly, "The land's the best, Cap'n." "It is, mate, for livin' on," he answered. "But I'm glad to have seen the mermaids," she added. "Well, so'm I, Trot," he agreed. "But I wouldn't 'a' believed any mortal could ever 'a' seen 'em an' " Trot laughed merrily. "And live to tell the tale!" she cried, her eyes dancing with mischief. "Oh, Cap'n Bill, how little we mortals know!" "True enough, mate," he replied. "But we're a learnin' somethin' ev'ry day." End of chapter 22. End of The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Recorded by Judy Bieber, Albuquerque, New Mexico, December 2008.